Just as the storming of the Bastille in 1789 was the French masses' symbolic assault against absolutism, the riots are an early warning to white America that patience has run out.
Ideas presents Dr. Martin Luther King in the first of 5 Massey Lectures for 1967. Unlike its predecessors, this year's lectures are by a man who is noted at least as much for his part in making history as for his analytic abilities. In tonight's talk, Dr. King discusses the relative merits of violent and nonviolent approaches to racial problems. Dr. Martin Luther King.
It is a deep personal privilege to address a nationwide Canadian audience. Over and above any kinship of United States citizens and Canadians as North Americans, that is a singular historical relationship between American Negroes and Canadians. Canada is not merely a neighbor to Negroes. Deep in our history of struggle for freedom, Canada was a North Star. The Negro slave, denied education, dehumanized and imprisoned on curl plantations, knew that far to the north a land existed where a fugitive slave, if he survived the horrors of the journey, could find freedom. The legendary Underground Railroad started in the South and ended in Canada. The Freedom Road links us together. Our spirituals, now so widely admired around the world, were often codes. We sang of heaven that awaited us, and the slave masters listened in innocence, not realizing that we were not speaking of the hereafter. Heaven was the word for Canada, and the Negro sang of the hope that his escape on the Underground Railroad would carry him there. And so, standing today in Canada, I am linked with the history of my people and its unity with your past. The Underground Railroad could not bring freedom to many Negroes, yet it did something far greater. It symbolized a hope when freedom was almost an impossible dream. Our spirit never died, even though the weight of centuries was a crushing burden. Our freedom was not won a century ago. It is not won today, but some small part of it is in our hands, and we are marching no longer by ones and twos, but in legions of thousands, convinced now that it cannot be denied by any human force. Today, the question is not whether we shall be free, but by what course we will win. In the recent past, our struggle has had 2 phases. The first phase began in the early 50s, when Negroes slammed the door shut on submission and subservience. Adapting nonviolent resistance to conditions in the United States, we swept into southern streets to demand our citizenship and manhood. For the South, with its complex system of brutal segregation, we were inaugurating a rebellion. Merely to march in public streets was to rock the status quo to its roots, boycotting buses in Montgomery, demonstrating in Birmingham, the citadel of segregation, and defying guns, dogs, and clubs in Selma, while maintaining disciplined nonviolence, totally confused the rulers of the South. If they let us march, they admitted their lie that the black man was content. If they shot us down, they told the world they were inhuman brutes. They tried to stop us by threats and fears, the tactic that had long worked so effectively. But nonviolence had muzzled their guns, and Negro defiance had shaken their confidence. When they finally reached for clubs, dogs, and guns, they found the world was watching, and then the power of nonviolent protest became manifest. It dramatized the essential meaning of the conflict and in magnified strokes made clear who was the evildoer and who was the undeserving victim. The nation and the world were sickened, and through national legislation wiped out 1,000 Southern laws, ripping gaping holes in the edifice of segregation. These were days of luminous victories. Negroes and whites collaborated for human dignity. But there was a limitation to our achievements. Negroes were outraged by inequality. Their ultimate goal was freedom. Most of the white majority were outraged by brutality. Their goal was improvement, not freedom or equality. When Negroes could use public facilities, register and vote in some areas of the South, and find token educational advancement, again in token form find new areas of employment, it brought to the Negro a sense of achievement, but it brought to the whites a sense of completion. When Negroes assertively moved on to ascend the second rung of the ladder, a firm resistance from the white community developed. This resistance characterized the second phase which we are now experiencing. The arresting of the limited forward progress by white resistance revealed the latent racism which was deeply rooted in United States society. Everyone underestimated the amount of bigotry the white majority was disguising, and the amount of violence and rage Negroes were suppressing. Nonviolence as a protest form came under attack as a tactical theory, and Northern Negroes expressed their dismay and hostility in a succession of riots. The riots are now in the center of the stage and are being offered as basis for contradictory positions by whites and Negroes. Some Negroes argue they are the incipient forms for rebellion and guerrilla tactics that will be the feature of the Negro revolt. They are represented as the new stage of Negro struggle, replacing the old and allegedly outworn tactic of nonviolent resistance. At the same time, some white forces are using riots as evidence that Negroes have no capacity for constructive change, and in their lawless behavior forfeit all rights and justify any form of repressive measures. I would like to examine both questions. Is the guilt for riots exclusively that of Negroes, and are they natural development to a new stage of struggle? 1,000,000 words will be written and spoken to dissect the ghetto outbreaks, but for a perceptive and vivid expression of culpability, I would submit 2 sentences written a century ago by Victor Hugo. If the soul is left in darkness, sins will be committed. The guilty one is not he who commits the sin, but he who causes the darkness. The policymakers of the white society have caused the darkness. They created discrimination. They created slums. They perpetuate unemployment and poverty. It is incontestable and deplorable that Negroes have committed crimes, but they are derivative crimes. They are born of the greater crimes of the white society. When we ask Negroes to abide by the law, let us also declare that the white man does not abide by law in the ghettos. Day in and day out, he violates welfare laws to deprive the poor of their meager allotments. He flagrantly violates building codes and regulations. His police make a mockery of law. He violates laws on equal employment and education. The slums are the handiwork